What I would like to do in my 5 to 7 minutes is to do two things. One is to talk about TPP overall, but especially with the emphasis of its implications for the region, and especially in the context of US kind of a rebalancing or pivot strategy. And secondly, I would like to talk about TPP and Taiwan. But unfortunately, I'm not a Taiwan expert at all. My expertise is on Japan. But interestingly, when I look into some of the dynamics, there's a lot of similarity and parallels that I see in the Japanese strategy in relation to TPP and some of the obstacles, and that of Taiwan. So I would like to emphasize that part and then conclude with that notion of the going forward. So what is TPP? And I think a lot of people already know Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was the kind of arrangement started with the 4 small countries which are very liberal in their economic and trade stance: Singapore, New Zealand, Chile, and Brunei, which started in mid-2000. And once the United States got on board, this became a big deal. This was under the Bush administration, right as the globe was hit by the global financial crisis. September of 2008 was the time that US announced its interest of expansion, as well as its kind of participation in a negotiation of expanded TPP. From there on, many members got on board. Australia, let's see if you can remember, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and then comes, Canada, Mexico, Japan, so on. So there was a member of 12 countries which pursued this so-called gold or platinum standard of trade liberalization without exemptions of any of the items that gets exempted from the free trade, as well, and mostly emphasizing the rule-setting role of TPP. So in the rule setting, there's rules in terms of intellectual property, competitive policies, many of the sanitation standard and so on. All these will be the part of TPP. The negotiation is ongoing. Actually, they were hoping to conclude this negotiation by December of last year. But due to Obama's absence to APEC meeting and various other kind of negotiation problems, they have postponed that conclusion. From my reading of people who are the Beltway insiders, actually just a month ago, there was a conference of this magnitude of Australian kind of US relationship, and we had Miki Kanta come to speak. And he was saying that the fact that if they cannot conclude TPP by the late spring of this year, it's in jeopardy. And one of the things that's important for TPP from the US standpoint is to have the Trade Promotion Authority for the President of the United States, so that they don't have to go through all the congressional kind of line by line scrutiny and go from there. But that's not going well I saw it late last month. So we will see TPP actually will pan out. But still, this is really a big deal for Asia Pacific overall. Finally, the characteristics of TPP is it's a living agreement. It will evolve as time goes by. Yes, they will conclude or hope to conclude by sometime this year, but there'll be accession code that many other countries will be able to become members. So in this TPP, what's the implication for Asia? I think there are 2 major ones. One is obviously relation to China. Currently, China is not a negotiating member of TPP, and some interpret this TPP to be a way to exclude China or put pressure on China. But those who are close to TPP see that, yes, true, the members currently negotiating TPP would like to put TPP in place, but they would really like to have China come into TPP somewhere in the near future as the gold standard of rules of free trade established through that method. So that's one important part of the TPP. The other one, especially when it comes to Asia overall, is the activation or the kind of activation of RCEP, RCEP, which came about right after the Japan announced its interest in participating in TPP negotiation. Actually, its actual official negotiation starting point was March of 2013, but when Prime Minister Kan in October of 2010 announced Japan's interest, RCEP kind of emerged forward. This was the trade negotiation among the Asia members, ASEAN plus 6, which Japan wanted to push forward, which was objected by China until then. China wanted ASEAN plus 3, which is only ASEAN and Japan, China, Korea, while Japan wanted to include plus 3, which are Australia, New Zealand, and India. So currently, RCEP, which I would like to call it, is ongoing negotiation parallel with TPP. So that's the kind of context. So how about TPP and Taiwan? I've been reading the fact that now the President Ma and the Trade Ministry and so on of Taiwan is keen to go up to be part of the TPP member. And well, obviously TPP itself is a moving target, so it's very hard to say whether it will be a member at the negotiation stage or as it concludes. But obviously, there's a very keen interest for Taiwan. I think I see, again, in the parallel to the Japan context, I see a lot of strategic benefits for Taiwan to be part of TPP. I would like to disaggregate it in one from the external benefit and then one for internal kind of a domestic benefit. External benefit is that TPP will give Taiwan a significant leverage. Japan, as it announced its participation to TPP, got a very significant leverage in pushing China to agree to RCEP. Again, as I said earlier, China wanted only plus 3. Now it is on board with plus 6. And China also started to be very interested in the 3 agreement, the Japan, Korea, and China FTA, and which was also starting its negotiation despite of the tension that is already in place between China and Japan as well as Korea and Japan. So in terms of that type of leverage, Taiwan would also have that along with its own connection to China. So as I said earlier, somewhere along the line, all the members of TPP want China to be part of TPP. So once Taiwan can be part of it, it will be the bridge for China to be integrated. Taiwan obviously is a part of APEC, which is the kind of the mother body of TPP, so which allows Taiwan to be able to negotiate TPP much more easily. And in the case of WTO in late 1990s to 2001, the double accession was possible. So in some ways, that would create, all those will create a very significant benefit to Taiwan. Also, in relation to its own competition in the global market, much less political, but much more economical business-wise, Taiwan will have as strong of a leverage as Korea. Korea has been a FTA forerunner. It has FTA with the United States, has FTA with Europe, and Japan also already is envious of Korea, and Taiwan is the same situation, more so because of the competition it has with Korea. So TPP will give the same level of leverage in accessing the market for Taiwan as it does for Korea. So, and obviously the final reason of a very strategic nature is its possible diversification of its trade profile from China. Obviously, ECFA has been a wonderful thing for Taiwan, I would think, in terms of business perspective, but it created much more dependence on the part of Taiwan on the Chinese markets. So all of that would be countered by Taiwan's membership in TPP on a kind of external point of view. Domestically speaking, it also has a leverage. Again, very similar parallel to Japan. Abe cabinet in Japan is trying to use TPP as one of the 3 arrows of Abenomics to restructure Japanese economy. TPP will do very similar thing to Taiwan. It will make their industry more vibrant, liberalization, obviously increasing competition, but will create a lot of competitive strength for the Taiwanese industries. So altogether, and also Taiwan would gain more credibility if it were to negotiate other free trade agreement, because now the Taiwanese government show that they can liberalize the economy quite significantly. Again, similar to Japan, Taiwan has been slightly kind of slow in negotiating negotiating FTAs, free trade agreements, just recently with New Zealand and Singapore, which are very kind of smaller liberal economies, while it will be able to do more with FTA strategy as they become part of TPP. But everything is not rosy obviously. There are some drawbacks and then challenges. Obviously, China's objection possibly to Taiwanese accession or integration into TPP is probably the big one. But also there is a lot of domestic opposition. In the agricultural sector overall would probably stand to lose quite significantly because of the competition. So they are quite significantly opposed to it. And also I've been hearing a lot of concerns about food security. And in the same way as the Japanese reaction and significant objection to TPP, I think Taiwanese population are worried about losing their way of life through TPP. So I think it's not so easy, but if there's a political policy leadership to push Taiwan towards TPP, I think there's a lot of things to be, a lot of benefit to be gained. So I'll stop here. Thank you.